Hello there. Today I'm going to be introducing a set of powerful resources that will help you in structuring your research as you work on larger projects. This will be geared mostly towards preparing a literature review in connection with a dissertation project, but the tools and strategies that we discussed today can apply to any larger research project. There's a lot to talk about, so let's dive in. Now, without further ado, the secret to writing a literature review quickly and painlessly. Just kidding. There isn't really a shortcut for this process. You'll need to read quite a bit in order to understand what scholars have already said about your topic, what they're currently saying about your topic, and where scholars either disagree or have missed an important angle that becomes your personal niche as you investigate your topic further. One of the main goals of a literature review is to map out where scholars stand on a topic of interest to you. Often during graduate level research, you may feel pressure to come up with something that is completely new, never before seen, a novel take on an issue. Don't feel that pressure. You can advance the conversation in your chosen field just as well by challenging the claims of one scholar or reinforcing the claims of another. Your goal is to join that academic conversation, that scholarly discourse surrounding your topic, with expertise that you will develop through research. With that angle in mind, you are now armed to investigate the sources and the databases to track the changes in the scholarly conversation on your topic. Believe me, if scholars have been writing about your topic for any length of time and are still writing about your topic, there will be disagreements between scholars about the evidence and what it means. This creates an opportunity for you to enter the conversation and add your own point of view, carving out your academic niche in the process. That doesn't mean that you need to read every article written about your topic in full. Instead, you should become comfortable with a speed reading technique that's used by PhD students and scholars. What you're most interested in for many articles is the claim that an author is making rather than their evidence. After all, what you want to do and what you want to find are the different arguments and claims that authors are making about your topic so that you can identify scholars who disagree with one another and ultimately who disagree with you. How can you quickly find that information? The abstract introduction and conclusion of a well-written article will lay out the author's claims and an overview of how they intend to support their argument. This will give you a clear idea of whether the source is one that you can use or not, and will also help you to map out the different directions that scholars have taken research on your topic. You're not as concerned with the evidence just yet. You'll get there. What you want to know is the arguments that are being made. This abstract that I've highlighted here in green maps out the claims that this article is going to advance. And if those engage with my research or are related to my topic, I want to note those down and then decide from there whether I need to see the evidence itself or whether I can continue on to find other articles and start to build a cluster of materials. This is also why you're going to end up with so many sources, because you're going to be tracking out the conversation as it happens, the scholarly discourse about your topic. Alone, each source will only tell you so much about the discussion surrounding your topic, but there are a variety of ways that we can start building up a portfolio of sources and arguments that don't involve a corkboard covered in strings and colored notes. There are a couple different methods that we're going to talk about today in order to start doing that, in order to replace your corkboard and put away your colored strings. The first method involves PowerPoint or Google Slides. Either one will work. Any presentation software will really work in this case. What we want to do is essentially build a note card. Incidentally, we could also do this on physical note cards, although it's going to be a little bit easier to map this out using PowerPoint or Google Slides or one of those other softwares that I mentioned. What we want to do is we want to find a resource that we think we're going to use. We want to record the title of that resource and the permalink to take us back to that resource later on so we can keep track of resources and how to access them again. And then we want to read just the abstract, the introduction, maybe the conclusion, as much as we need to get a sense for the argument that that paper is making, right? So we've found a source that might be useful. We think it probably ties into our research, but because we're building such a large research project, it's good to keep track of what you found in a coordinated way like this. So what I end up with is the name of the article that I've found, the link to go back to it, and then an overview of the arguments that are being made by that article. Any sort of interesting illustrations, maps in my case when I'm doing historical research, figures, results from research experiments, that sort of thing from psychology and from a more science-based approach. Anything that you think might be useful, that you might want to refer back to again as a graphic, it's a good idea to get just a quick screenshot of that image from the source itself and add it to this note card. It's much harder, if you think about it, to search for an image that you can mostly remember than it is to search for a quote from one of these documents. So this is going to speed up the process when you're 50 sources in and you remember there was that one map that demonstrated the forces that were involved in a specific battle. You can't remember the name of the battle anymore, and you need that map. Well, rather than going through all 50 sources, I now have that map on a note card that I can quickly find and recognize which source that came from. The other thing that you should get in the habit of doing is building out identifiers. In library science, we call this metadata, data about information or data about data. Or you could think of this as hashtags. These are the different ways that you can describe that resource with just a quick heading, right? This particular resource might be one that's useful for my literature review, so I flag it with that tag, or I leave that tag from my template on the card for that resource. If it deals with an important discovery or an important idea that I want to pursue for further research, I might leave those tags on the card for that resource. If it's considered a must-read in my discipline, I want to add that as well, so that I can build a set of cards later on that is all of the sources that I know that I've heard referenced frequently and need to actually read in full. I might find resources that describe a particular method of historical research or psychological research or research into leadership studies, any topic, something where a scholar has built a particular type of experiment or a particular approach to the sources that I think I can probably use. That becomes my pile of method sources. There are a variety of other topics, other headings that you can attach to these sources that will make sense as you go. As you build out your resources, you're going to have a really good sense for the conversation surrounding your field. You're becoming the expert in that field. And in doing so, you'll know what tags make sense. I'm going to show you in the next slide what that looks like in my own research in a different platform. We're going to talk about Zotero next. All right, so let's look at the resource Zotero. Zotero is a new one for me. It's a very powerful resource that I didn't have available when I was working on my master's thesis, and I wish that I had because it makes life much easier. It's a tool that you're going to want to learn how to use well. So what does Zotero allow you to do? The first thing that it allows you to do is any source that you find, you can import it into your Zotero library, and it will keep track of the source itself. It'll give me all of the metadata information that I need in order to properly cite that source in my references page, right? So I've got the type of resource, a book, the title, the author, an abstract that tells me what it's about. I have the place and time of publication, an ISBN number if I wanted to find it again, all of the different pieces of information that I need in order to be able to actually properly cite this resource in my larger work. Okay? All conveniently organized here. That by itself is useful. There are other things, though, that Zotero does that go far beyond just a citation management, a reference builder, which is what I originally thought that it was. Okay? So if I look over here at my library of sources, I can see at a glance that I have 157 items that I've gathered together. That's a lot of resources, so subdividing those by where I intend to put them in the larger work that I'm building is going to be very important, right? I have the overall project, but then I have subfolders. You're going to find that I love subfolders. They're the different metadata tags that allow me to sort my information and sort my sources by what I intend to do with them. So for this project in particular, I'm interested in Byzantine, the martial ethos of their culture, their military theories, their political culture, historical context of events that happened surrounding the writing of this chronicler that I'm working on. And then we also have the history of the history, the historiography of the chroniclers themselves, and then also modern works that look at those sources, right? So I can see at a glance how many resources I have in each of these subfields. I can know where my research probably needs to be built up a little bit more, where it's not as strong, and also places where it's quite strong. I have quite a bit of information in this particular subcategory. If it were a dissertation project, I would know that this chapter is in pretty good hands, while the modern historiography has fewer sources. It might be something that I need to build up a little bit more. That's useful. That's an added feature above and beyond just keeping track of my references. Now, if I go to one of these individual sources, I can see what makes Zotero really useful to me, and will probably make it useful to you as well. This is the element that I'm most excited about. You can read your sources in Zotero. It has a PDF viewer, so that's nice. You can also edit the material itself. I can highlight this. I can add a colored highlight so that I know what category of information that is. Which chapter or which argument within a chapter is this piece of information going to be useful at building up. Okay, we can see that in practice if I click on this larger highlight here. Off to the side you have the quote itself, which will be useful when I incorporate that into the larger work. Below I have the metadata tags. This is a historiography piece of information. This is a Howard Johnston theorem piece of information. That in particular, the Howard Johnston theory, is one that I'm going to wrestle with and ultimately try to disprove in my larger work. So flagging anywhere that that theory is mentioned becomes a very powerful way to keep track of what each author has to say about this theory, and allows me to marshal my sources very quickly on that topic. I can, at a glance, see which of the articles that I've collected in this research project address this theory, and then collate those sources together, see who agrees, who disagrees, what evidence is being used, all of the things that are going to make your writing more focused, more structured, and stronger. The other piece is that I can add comments to my future self to tell me how I intended to use this piece of information. What was it that caught my interest when I first read this? Or, as I'm reading through, how do I intend to connect it to other pieces of information? What are my thoughts about it? This will help me to remember it, and also will help me to build it into my papers moving forward. So between those two pieces, the fact that I can tag the information with metadata and allow myself to find it more easily later on, and also add commentary to my future self that helps me to understand how I intend to use the resource, that's going to be very helpful in writing my larger piece. And for an example here, if I look just for the sources that are connected, I can go back to my library, I can scroll through my metadata tags in the bottom left here. If I click on that Howard Johnston theory, I notice that there are several sources that I've collected that address that have that metadata tag, that have highlights of that color with that comment, allowing me to pull all of these resources together very quickly and then compare what's been said, right? The other thing that Zotero is very good at and encourages me to do, that we don't talk about enough, that we don't think about enough, is the idea that I'm working on a large project, right? We looked at 157 results. This number changes periodically, which is interesting. It now says 185 results in my library that are connected to this research project. I've gathered those over a fairly extended period of time. I no longer remember with perfect clarity the first source that I collected or why I collected it, right? Adding those notes to your future self will help you so much in 6 months when you come back to this project and you ask yourself, what was I thinking? What was the direction that this was going? Those first notes are also where you're going to start to build out those metadata tags. You're going to identify things like that Howard-Johnston theorem that I noted there that will become metadata tags that you find in other sources as well. So that process is an evolution. It grows as you go and as you collect more information. But keep that in mind. Keep in mind that you want to remind your future self what you intended to do with that resource in order to make sure that your research stays focused and builds upon itself, builds those connections to the scholarly literature, to the conversation that's ongoing surrounding your topic. So that was Zotero, and let's say that next I'm working on a public computer terminal. I'm working at the public library, and I don't have Zotero installed on the computer. I want to keep track of the research that I've done, and I want to make sure that I have access to it again later on. I want to be able to know whether I've found a source before and keep track of how I intend to use that source. There's a wonderful built-in feature through the library's databases that allows you to do that. Let's say I'm doing a search through Dragon Quest. I started over here at the library's homepage, looked for Sparta, decided eventually to narrow that down to Spartan military. I've narrowed things down with my filters and my refine results page over here. And now I have some sources that I'd like to think about using. Okay. Let's say that this Spartan elite and corruption scandals catches my eye. I can't remember if I've seen this source before. I won't necessarily remember the next time I see it whether I've seen this source before. I'm going to look at a lot of different sources during my research process. You saw 184 different search results, different resources that I had chosen to include in the project that I'm actually working on in the background, not including all of the sources that I saw and decided weren't useful. So a lot of different things to keep track of. What I can do over here, once I've found a source that I think I might want to use, I have a couple options. I can email it to myself. I can download this permalink, save this permalink so I have access to the source again. Those are all valid options that allow you to keep track of the source and the individual source. But there's another way that I can approach this as well. If I add this to a folder and then click on that folder up at the top menu bar across the way here, I can see what I've found in this specific instance of my search, right? This only keeps track of what I've currently searched for in my current session. It doesn't carry over, but it can, because I can go over here to sign in to my EBSCO. And the first time that you do this, you'll have to create a My EBSCO account. Because I've already done that, I don't need to sign up. I have my credentials stored and can just sign in. Now, what I'm going to see when this eventually processes is all of the other articles that I've come across that I've saved. Okay? Right now, they're just stashed in a generic folder and then articles. I can add any number of custom folders that I want. I can move these around into those custom folders. I can change how this is displayed. I can change how this is sorted. I can move things around so that it's easier for me to know what I intended to do with that particular resource. And you just saw this carried over 6 other articles that I didn't look at in this session that I have looked at before, and that have built up my collection of resources that I can then use to write my paper. And that's it. You should now feel more confident in your ability to manage a large number of sources and then to coordinate the connections between those sources as you develop your research into your own personal niche. You should feel a lot more confident about joining the scholarly conversation on your topic and hopefully feel a little bit of that pressure to create something brand new, never before seen, a little bit of that leaving your shoulders. Feel free to browse the other videos in our collection to improve your research skills even more.